welcome to Frankly Speaking, the podcast that gains access to real and inspiring people. Before I speak to today's guest, the comedian Matt Price, I'd just like to make a few announcements. First of all, I'd like to thank today's sponsor, Category A Consultancy. Of course, I'd like to thank all our subscribers, all those who leave comments, likes, etc. And of course, we would like more subscribers. We'd like to grow the channel, give more opportunity to our guests, and to carry on and follow on what they do after they leave us, and also to encourage more guests to come on. As usual, we continue to support two very good organisations. We support the Alzheimer's Society, all the amazing work that they do for both patients and their families. And our other campaign, which is an anti-knife campaign, Change Your Life, Put Down Your Knife. And last but not least, Gary from Mahat Media for all his technical advice and support. But the main man today is Matt Price, who's a comedian, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. He is actually a comedian and a very good comedian. I've seen some of his stuff. And with a name like Matt, I'd like to think he won't gloss over anything. So, Matt, that was the joke, by the way, chaps. This is the bit.
Okay, it was good. It was good.
I'm working on it. Anyway, Matt, welcome to Frankly Speaking. It's taken us a while to get together. You very kindly interviewed me a while back.
Yes.
Very thorough interview, I must say. One I thoroughly enjoyed. But now listen, I'm in charge this time.
Frank.
I'm doing the interrogate. No, Matt, welcome, mate.
Brilliant.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you for having me, mate. Thank you very much. It really means a lot, actually, because I enjoyed our...
Yeah, so did I. So what I'd like to do, Matt, is start at the beginning, as they say, where you grew up. Yes. I thought it was the West Country, but it's somewhere else, wasn't it?
Well, I've had a bit of a mixture, really. And before I actually start, can I just say I'm glad you said I'm a good comedian, because I generally, when I'm not actually working in a formal setting, I'm not funny. So I don't want to ruin your podcast by not being hilarious. I mean, I might actually just bring out something funny, but you've set the bar high with the Matt joke. But if I'm not, can I just say, sorry, Frank.
Well, you've got a perfect excuse, Matt, because you're not getting paid.
Well, it's not the payment. It's just there's not the pressure of lights. I'm in great company, but it's just I don't think you're going to heckle me. That would be bad. So it's a slightly different vibe. But to answer your question, I was born in Truro in Cornwall, so I am actually from the West Country. But as a kid, we moved around quite a lot. I say it was me and my mum. My mother was a political activist with very good intentions. So we lived in, as far as I can remember, we lived in Sussex. We lived in Oldham, where I went to school, I think Chadderton, and we might have been to Rochdale at one point. And I know that from the age of 5 until 9, I lived in Brixton and Tulse Hill Estate. And when I marched against everything as a kid, and I mean everything, and it used to be a little bit tiresome, but I think this could well have set the scene or sowed the seeds of me being an entertainer, because when you're 5 years old and you don't really know, you don't have any political beliefs, I'll be honest with you, I didn't, but an adult gives you an egg and you're allowed to throw an egg at whoever the opposition are, anti-capitalist marches, whoever it was. You're not very good, but you throw an egg and you get a round of applause from some random adults. That stays with you. Right. That stuff really sets you up for life. And so I can remember police horses, because obviously there'd be policemen there, to stop us from being genuinely attacked by the enemy, whoever they were. And my mum explained it in very, very simple terms. And so I was brought up with a sense of morality. Now I know that's that's a moot point, isn't it? Because what is right and wrong. But I'll give you an example. When I was 7, my mum bought me some Yankee and Confederate soldiers and they would have been Red Indians at the time, and a fort. And she said to me, you're allowed to play with them, and you understand that war is fundamentally wrong. I mean, I had a good vocabulary for a 7-year-old. She said, but sometimes you can fight for what you believe in. She said, so by all means, these are the guys who are into slavery, the Confederates. These are my apologies to anyone watching from America, by the way, butchering your history. But we've got the Confederates here who are into slavery, the Yankees here who aren't into slavery, and the Native American Indians or Red Indians who own the land. People will die in this conflict. I mean, it sounds like a comedy. I promise you it's not. She said, but bear in mind who was there first. So ideally, everyone dies apart from a few Red Indians, because that way they can just reproduce and carry on living off the land. So I had quite an unusual upbringing in that respect. And I can remember sitting on Father Christmas's knee when I was about 7 years old, and kids, you have the nature nurture debate about whether it's the environment that makes you who you are, or whether it's whether you're born that way. I sat on Father Christmas's knee when I was about 7 years old, and he said to me, "What do you want for Christmas?" And I said, "I want you to free Nelson Mandela." And because I've been influenced by my mother, so at the age of 9, I then went to live in Cardiff for a while. I walked out on my mum. My dad was living with a woman who tried to attack him with a carving knife, and life really began when I was 9, back home in Cornwall. And I was a slightly messed up, very shy kid who I love my grandparents very much. They fought during the war, or at least my granddad was over in Africa, and they gave me a very solid upbringing, but the damage in some respects was already done. It's not a boo-hoo story or a sob story, but those are my formative years. Yeah. So whoever the psychologist was says, "Show me the boy at 7, I'll show you the man." Well, I'm hoping that I've got over it.
Yeah. What was your school days like, education wise?
Do you know what? Here's the thing, because my mum had she was very noble in the sense that she wanted to save the world, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I say it with utmost respect to her. I wasn't necessarily a priority, so I didn't get to go to school very much. And unfortunately, at the age of 11, I was in the bottom class for everything. And I was in the remedial class at school. And I was, and you can imagine in the 80s as a kid, teacher, you didn't have mixed ability groups. You were one of the thick kids. And even the teachers called you thick as well. And I can remember saying, I was doing remedial maths and saying to one of the school teachers, "Excuse me, I think there's been an administrative error," which to me, that's a reasonable word and a reasonable phrase to use, but not one that you might associate with the remedial class. And the teacher said, don't be so stupid, and or something along those lines. And then the kid next to me stabbed me with a compass. And I thought, this is going to be a long haul. And it was.
That's what you get using long words, you see. It's your own fault for using long words, trying to be too smart.
I learned the hard way, Frank. So from then on, I thought, no, I'll just put my head down.
But did you get the point?
The point with the compass. Thank you.
I know I'm digging deep here.
I'm setting them up and you're knocking them down.
Yeah,
definitely. Like a Morecambe and Wise.
So can we assume you left with no qualifications of any note, or?
Do you know, you're correct. I didn't have many qualifications, but having said that, I sort of almost had a point to prove. So I started skateboarding then when I was about 14. Me and my friend Richard Hill, we were the last 2 break dancers in the whole of Cornwall. Everybody gave up break dancing and we carried on. We were like the soldiers in Vietnam who didn't realize the war was over. And we were still walking around breakdancing, and there was a breakdance crew who came down from Portsmouth who were absolutely phenomenal. And we had our asses handed to us. And I remember Richard saying to me, "I think we better take up skateboarding now. We're done." And so we hung up our night jackets and got into skateboarding. And when I bought my skateboard, and this has been the theme for my life, it was raining. And there were 2 guys who said to me, or 2 young men, but they seemed like guys at the time, when you're 13 or 14, "Go on then, let's see you ride it." And I jumped on it and I fell off. in the rain, and they laughed, and I went home crying, and I chucked my skateboard in the bin, and I thought, that's it, I'm never going to step on a skateboard again. 5 years later, I was training for the World Skateboarding Championships because that guy was something to prove to myself. So when I left school, I couldn't swim for various reasons. I was terrible at swimming. I was frightened of water. My teacher said to me, there's a job going for a trainee swimming pool attendant. You'll never be a lifeguard. There's no way you'll get that. And I thought, well, I'll show you. So I went along and I got the job. And then a year later, I was fired for 2 reasons. One, I couldn't swim. So that's really difficult if you're going to be a lifeguard. And two, I was on poolside and I was up a metal ladder and I had to change a clock. Now, it wasn't wired up to the mains, but clearly a big battery running it. And the fellow lifeguard was at the bottom of this metal ladder, holding the metal ladder. And I was fumbling around and there was a bare wire. And he was calling me names, names that you can't, things that you can't do now that would be politically incorrect. But he was gesturing and all that. And I touched a bare wire. And my grandma always used to say, a trouble shared is a trouble halved. We shared an electric shock. He jumped out of his skin. I was fired because I couldn't swim and because I technically electrocuted a lifeguard. And everything I did after that point was just trying to prove to myself that everything I've ever done prior to that, the theme has been trying to prove myself. And so I carried on with skateboarding because those two kids said, you'll never be a skateboarder. I had no choice but to not be a lifeguard. When skateboarding stopped because I had an ingrown toenail, I mean, you'll know about football, Frank. You know that loads of people will go, oh, I had an injured knee, or my knee. If it weren't for the knee, I could have played for Tottenham, Frank. You know what I mean? I started smoking and boozing, and then my knee went, and then my back. But I could have definitely. I could have been up front. Well, yeah, we've all hear those heartbreaking stories. Yeah. Well, I had an ingrown toenail that went septic, and I probably grew about 1.5 inches, so I couldn't quite do the same tricks. And then somebody said to me, when I went along to a college to see if I could get educated, formally educated, I should say, because I thought if I did a psychology degree, it'd make me sound brainy. And so I remember it's ridiculous, but I did, because if you haven't got any formal education, you think, well, what's going to sound impressive? And the woman said to me, no offense, I've read your test essay that you did, and you're not an academic, and you will never be one, never. And I thought, well, I'm going to show you. And so I worked really hard. And then a year later, she said, on this access course, equivalent of A-levels, she said to me, do you know, I will hold my hands up. I'm going to say, I was wrong. Oh. She said, you're actually quite an intelligent guy. She said, you're not a genius, so don't get up yourself. She said, but you're going to do all right. And so I went to university, and I remember saying goodbye to my best mate at the time, and we went out and had a skin full of drink, because he said, well, look, chances are, we may never stay in touch anymore, and you might get all grand ideas and all that. So let's just go out and get hammered. He said, before you get all snooty and don't want to know me anymore. And then I said, I can't make up my mind whether to do psychology or philosophy. And he said, go for an philosophy, because they're rare. Yeah. So I studied philosophy because it just sounded good. And I thought, well, if you can string a sentence together, you can disguise the fact that that someone stabbed you with a compass when you were 11.
It doesn't actually come as that much of a surprise to me, because when we'd spoken previously, you were very articulate, and you certainly asked some very deep questions. In fact, I can't go into it, but I can think of a couple that nobody else had asked. And also when it came to the book, my book that you'd read, there was something. Again, I won't mention it. It's not my platform today. It's yours. But you did focus on something that nobody else had really focused on. I think that says something about your intellect, that you spotted it, you absorbed it, shall we say. and then you asked me.
Yeah.
And, so, yeah, that word thick, it can easily be bandied about, can't it? But if people
of course.
haven't drawn out, skills that and talents that people have got, sometimes it takes a lot longer for it to manifest itself, And just to reiterate, so what level again did you get to with the skateboarding?
Well, I was good. I was very good. I got invited to the World Skateboarding Championship, so I was pretty decent. I competed in Europe. I competed in. I would never have won. I wasn't. That's not me being negative, but there were people who were better. But I could hold my own in Europe for sure. I went to compete in Gothenburg, and because nobody told me how expensive it was, and I had my last crown or whatever it was, and I remember putting it in the slot to get a cup of tea. But I didn't get the cup right, so the tea just sort of squirted all over the machine. I remember I was just heartbroken. I thought, oh, brilliant! I slept rough when I was over there as well, but I was at a a fairly decent level, and I just worked very hard at it. And there is footage of me skateboarding as well online, so I tried very hard.
All right, okay, have a look at that. What about employment? Early employment, or did you go from study into comedy?
Oh no, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I'm talking. So obviously I got fired for electrocuting the lifeguard and not being able to swim. Then I worked in retail for a while, or just in shops. Then I worked in a factory, and so I have to say, food preparation, they were meticulous. So nobody has to sort of see this and be worried. We were packing fish, but there were occasions when you'd get a little bit tired when somebody would screw up a lump of fish and throw it at your head. And frozen fish in the side of your ear roll, it hurts.
Yeah,
it does sometimes. And occasionally they would pick people up and throw them into the offal bin. And, and they would, and there was, I wouldn't say there was bullying as such, but they would drive people insane sometimes with the banter. And I was lucky, I fitted in. One person would get fired. I was there for 2 years, and one person would get fired, would leave every day on average. And I can remember somebody took me under his wing, and he said to me, "Listen, boy, if you want to survive in here, you're going to have to be quick with your banter, mate. You're going to have to just slam them. Don't worry about it." It was a very blokey environment. And I learned how to do it, how to put people down without them wanting to punch me, because I'm not going to fight. And there is a knack to it. There's boundaries, so you sort of learn boundaries in a way. And there was a memory when there was a student who came to work there for about 6 weeks, and I went home because my grandparents were just down the road. So I came back and I could feel the atmosphere in the crib room, and I said, what's happened? And one of the boys said, "Oh, he thinks he's better than we are," and this student kid had said to them, "Well, you're all idiots." He actually said, "You're all retarded. You're going to be in dead-end jobs for the rest of your life. You're all morons. You're all thick," And to be fair, banter wasn't his forte. He was just lashing out because he'd had enough. We all go downstairs onto the factory floors. About 20 of us were packing the fish. And the supervisor came over to him and said to him, "Now listen, my boy," he said, "I'm not saying this to disrespect you or frighten you in any way," he said, "but you've just insulted a group of people here. It's in your interests to go to the toilet in a moment and just don't come back." He said, "Because they will beat you up." He said, "They will." He said, "And I don't want that to happen to you." He said, "Because you've got somewhere to go. You have somewhere to go, and we don't. All right, so just take this as a life lesson." And the kid just ran for it. And I was lucky in the sense that, I did fit in, and actually they were very kind. And if I'd have believed what people had told me prior to working in the factory, I probably wouldn't have worked there. Because of the various areas that they were all from. And when my granddad died, I remember one of them, who was a kind of a ringleader, came over and he said to me, "Listen, I'm really sorry about your granddad." He said, "We're going to have, what do you call it?" He meant amnesty. But he said, "We're going to have the bloody, And I said, "Well, what?" He said, "We're going to lay off you for a week." He said, "Mate, we're not going to take the piss out of you." And he said, "And by the way," he said, "you do know I haven't really had sex with your grandma, don't you?" He said, "It is You know, and I thought, you picked a great time. He said, no, I'm not saying she's not a lovely lady and she's not attractive or anything, but what I'm saying is, and I just, it was just a really nice, sweet moment. And I got to see the core of those people. Because, and I like to, I take some credit for that, but, you know, to go back to when I was a kid, my mum brought me up to believe that people are actually fundamentally all right. Even if you're chucking eggs at them, they're still all right, really. They've just gone down the wrong road.
Yeah. When I worked in the print for quite some time, I was a dispatch manager, and we would have young messengers, you know, start every now and again. And it wasn't uncommon, you know, after the first couple of days that I could see, you know, one of the new boys would be unhappy, and I'd say, "Oh, what's the matter, mate?" You know. And you've got to remember, these kids, you know, most of these kids come off tough working class estates, you know, in Camden, in central London. And, you know, you get some kids who are a little bit quieter, a little bit meeker than the others. And they be concerned about getting their leg pulled a little bit and so on. And I used to say, listen, son, the trick is we slag each other off all day. Doesn't matter whether you're a manager or a messenger. We all do it. But when we leave here, you go home, you wipe the slate clean, and you come back the next day, and you think of something worse to say, and then we'll all put it on. And that's what used to happen. That's what used to happen. Because then no one could complain. So if the new kid came in the next day and said something to someone, and he got the hump about it and wanted to get a little bit violent, then I would step in and say, "Hey, hold on, you can't have it both ways. You was dealing it out yesterday, you know." And if I'm honest, I was one of the worst. I was probably one of the worst for dealing it out, you know. But it was a grounding for people. It wasn't done out of malice. It was just to say, look, we're a bunch of blokes. We're all different ages, you know, with different generations, different senses of humour. Yeah, some of us are a little bit more sensitive than others. But yeah, it works. It works. And it's quite nice, because I've said this in the previous podcast, that it's nice when I'm out with my wife socially, and I'll sometimes, you know, bump into these fellas, you know, and they come up and, you know, shake my hand. They're married now, they've got families of their own. Some of them have even got mortgages of their own, you know, and they come up and they say, "Thanks, Frank, I appreciated that, you know, your advice you used to give me years ago."
Oh, yeah.
It's nice, yeah. Yeah, it's a nice place, I think, and particularly it's a very male-dominated environment as well. You know, everyone's trying to be the tough guy and, you know, got the most money or drinks the most, or is the best gambler, the best fighter. It is difficult for young people to come into that environment, but listen, they've turned out all right.
Oh, they do, and it's a good education in a way. And also, when we went, I mean, we used to go occasionally. We would all go out together. And the thing is, when you work with fish, you tend to smell of fish. It's hard to get it out of your system. So you do tend to socialise with other people who also smell of fish. So it was partly necessity as well. But we would go out, we would drink together. But the thing is, if anybody started anything, because they knew I wouldn't fight, they would be, "Oh, hang on, just leave him alone, or leave us," you know. And it was very nice. Not, you know, and so that was weird. It was almost like, you know, yeah, he's our idiot. Not just with me, but with other people as well. So if someone would ever go at one of the boys, you know, and that there is something about that. Yeah, well, look, he's one of our lot. And they would take the piss out of people big time. But it was almost like, yeah, but we're out together. So it was a strange dynamic if you're not used to it. But you know that. I mean, you know what it's like. So I think that equipped me well then when I went to university, you know, I was only 21 when I went. But those 3 years, or a couple of years of work in the factory, I think it just made me a different person. Of course, but then, of course, you face the problem of thinking you're not good enough, and, you know, blimey, everyone's going to be in it. You know, you think, well, I mean, Einstein went to university. I bet he didn't work in a factory. So then you have a whole other set of challenges, you know, or I did anyway. Just thinking, are the stupidity police going to jump out and arrest me now? You know, because there's no skateboard here, and I can't sort of chuck a lump of fish at someone and tell them I had sex with their mum, because that's not going to work. So what do you do now? But,
how did you settle in at university? Was it a good environment for you?
Well, to be honest, it was fine to start with. I lived with lots of different types of people. I remember living in a halls of residence with some Greek guys, and I liked them. I learned very quickly that the louder they were, the more they liked me. And that seemed to be and that's sort of almost counterintuitive. I said, well, lots of love to any Greek people who might be watching, but it was like, Matt, and they would shout, and other people would think, God, those Greeks are loud, aren't they? And I go, no, you don't get it, mate. They've got progressively louder. They're friendly. It's just, you listen to Greek blokes, especially late at night chatting, you'd think they were having an argument. They're not. And so I got to know, once again, comfortable with other people's cultures anyway. And I quite liked it, but I didn't feel that I was quite sort of good enough to be there as well. So it was always that thing, but I didn't want to leave because I didn't want to fail. So I stuck it out, and I did okay. Came 3-4 years later, actually came back with a decent education, formal education, I have to say, and ended up working in the health and beauty section in Tesco's, and thought, no, that this is just a cruel joke. So I left.
While you was in university, did any of your mother's political influence carry on? I mean, were you part of any societies in university, or did you just concentrate on your studies?
I concentrated on my studies. I was still very, very shy at this point, painfully shy. So it was, so that was difficult. My granddad died when I was 22, and I think I was 22, maybe 20, and I just remember him saying to me, he said to me, listen, I'm very proud of you. He said, just know that, and so that meant a lot to me. And oddly enough, I was living in, they call it the Bay now in Cardiff. It was the docks then. And I was living down there, and I walked around an amateur boxing club, like around the periphery of the Prince of Wales Boxing Club, and I thought I really want to go in because I was hurted. I never felt that kind of emotional grief before, and somebody said to me, "You'll never be a boxer." And even though I knew I wouldn't be, I thought, "How dare you? I'll prove you wrong." And also my granddad, who I found some boxing trophies, and after my granddad had died, and I wanted to win a trophy for him, and I did. I trained as an amateur for a couple of years. They were really nice to me. I was super heavyweight. There's footage of me at one point. I mean, I have my eyes closed the entire time. My opponent, it's ridiculous. I mean, he leaned on me, okay, and my eyes were closed, and I pushed him off, and my eyes are still closed. He bounced off the ropes. My eyes are still closed. I pushed him off again. I swung my left hand, and his chin landed on my fist, and he fell on the floor. And I thought I'd knocked him out, so I threw my hands up in the air like that. And then the referee came over in it's a Masonic hall in Penarth. He tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Oh, excuse me, do you want to stop celebrating?" And this guy got up at 8 and then battered me. And well, fair enough, it happens, isn't it? It's not the best story. And then my trainer said to me afterwards, listen, he said, in 30 years of being a boxing trainer, I have never, from my heart, seen a crowd laugh that much. He said, I mean, we've had invites to dinner dues and all that. And they were really nice, and they were really nurturing, and it was a good experience to have. I had a few fights. I was never, ever going to be a fighter, but I had a lot to prove to myself, just to prove I could do it, just to know what would I do in a combat situation. And I can say to you, Frank, do you know what I do in a combat situation? That's what I do, because I've got no, I will close my eyes and I'll knock you down, but at best. But
you got in the ring. I'm glad you a lot of people talk a good fight, and
yes, they do.
And then they get in the ring and they find out different, and some people just don't even get in the ring. I like the sport. I don't follow it as ardently as some people, because I've got the football bug. But no, I've got a lot of respect for two men, or even now two women, that get into a ring, greet each other, knock 7 bells out of each other, and then acknowledge each other at the end. I mean, that takes a hell of a lot of respect. And
yes, it does.
and you know, the skill and the discipline involved, that I think is amazing. And I've said this more than once, that's for sure. I like the training side of boxing, but learned
very much so.
But learned very quickly that I didn't mind doing the punching, but I didn't like receiving the punching back. So
no,
it was a bit of a leveler for me, to be quite honest. But yeah, I've got a lot of respect for that particular. I call it a sport. I probably refer to it more as a discipline. I think it's the same as being in the army. You know, there's a discipline about it. And in fact, some of the boxers that I've met, not necessarily famous boxers, but people committed to the sport, I find them quite humble. Not flash, know what they can do, and don't take advantage of it. And as I say, I've got a lot of time for that particular sport.
I found them very nurturing and very interesting, and I was really fascinated by their wisdom as well, because there's something, especially with the amateur code, because amateur boxing trainers are, to me, they're exceptional people. You know, they don't do it for the money, they do it for the love of it. And they know very much that most of the kids who go in through their doors, they're not going to be champions. They might have a few fights. Some will go on and they'll box for Wales in this instance, but the majority won't. But it does teach the kids a certain level of discipline, and everybody was respectful of everybody. And I remember I wasn't a good boxer at all, but I remember I was shopping, and it sounds so trivial, but I was shopping in the local supermarket, and the kids offered to carry my, I say kids, young men, 13-year-olds, 4 of them, they offered to carry my bags for me. I mean, I could have managed, no problem. But I said, oh, thank you. That's really nice of you. And I asked my trainer why. And he said to me, well, because they respect you. And I said, yeah, but I'm a terrible boxer. And he said, doesn't matter. He said, they just respect you.
No.
He said, it's not about that. He said, respect has got nothing to do. He said, you actually win twice in boxing just by getting in between the ropes. You win. Yeah. He said, for most people, it has nothing to do with anybody else. He said, it's 2 young men, for the most part, women do it now, as you say, but he said it's 2 young men learning about themselves, for the most part. And some go on, very, very rarely you'll get a Josh Taylor, or whatever, or a champion, and then within that an elite level. But for the most part, and so at that point, I definitely learned a lot. I learned that it's not for me, but I'm glad I did it. It's one of those things. Character building things.
We say, as we say on Frankly Speaking, that, we want real and inspiring people. And, we don't know everybody's story. I didn't know that. That's something I've learned today, that you've done that. And say shocked, not shocked, but surprised. A little bit surprised. I didn't know that.
No more surprised than me.
Because I suppose because I know you as Matt Price, the comedian. That's I tend to make reference. Matt Price, but of course there's similar sides to you. And saying that, when did you decide or feel you were capable of becoming a comedian?
Well, here's the thing. There's parallels between boxing and comedy. One of the first things a boxing trainer said to me, it's not why you start, it's why you stay. And he's right, because a lot of people think, I'll do a bit of skipping, punch the bags, that's it, I'll be a champion. You get punched in the face and you think, I don't think I like this. And it's parallel being, you go to an open mic night in front of 6 people, there's 12 other comedians on, and you die, and you think, it's going to be a long haul. So I decided about 20 years ago that I was going to do it, and I was in Cardiff at the time. I was working in the call centre circuit, as it were. You could get a job in one call centre and more or less go to another one. And it was just a dead-end job. And I wanted to be a comedian, but we had a local comedy club, and there was about 6 of us who would go down. And one of the guys there said to me, "You'll never be a comedian." And I thought,
sorry to interrupt. Why did you want to be a comedian? Had you seen other comedians that inspired you?
I think, well, yes, I had, but I also wanted to do it, I think, because I've always sort of always kind of confronted my fears because I was very shy. You know, I always felt, well, that would be a huge test. In the same way that because I didn't think I could ever fight anybody, stepping into a ring was a big deal. You know, and so I think there was part of me that thought I would really like to challenge myself in that way. At the time, I wanted to write a book about boxing because I was fascinated by just these people and the way they were. And as you said, very humble people. It's a weird mixture because it's such a brutal, savage sport, and yet they're very gentle as well at the same time. Boxing trainers are potentially sending a young man, you know, to lose their career. They could get injured, they could die, you know, so they're training someone to bash somebody up. But by the same token, they're also extremely nurturing. I was fascinated by that, and I really wanted to write a book about it. And it didn't happen in the end. And I sort of thought, well, comedy, I've kind of wanted to do it. I didn't really think that I could. Someone said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's no way you ever could." And then I drifted into it, and thought, and for the first few years, didn't really want to be there. We set up a comedy club on a Sunday night in Cardiff at the Yellow Kangaroo pub, and Bob, the landlord, would keep the snooker on. So because the locals liked the snooker, it was free entry. And if you timed it right, you know, when they pop the ball, the audience will applaud. You could tell a joke and then do the punchline in time for when the ball potted and then go, thank you.
I love it.
Like that.
I love it. Yeah.
You know, it was rough. It was genuinely rough. And of course, because you write your own material, you would get people who would come in and they go, oh, I don't know, who's that bloke there? Never heard of him before. You know, I like Roy Chubby Brown. I like proper jokes. What's he observing stuff for? You know, and you get people who be heckling you. And you'd have to, and at that point, it's almost like driving. You know, you sort of know there are elements to it, but you don't quite know what you're doing. So you've got to be able to pitch it at the right level, not just the jokes and the material, but how do you put somebody down but still keep the audience on side? You know, and so, you know, every gig was a learning gig. And so sometimes I'd go out and do really well, but I didn't know why I was doing well. And sometimes I'd go out and do really well, and I'd be comparing and I'd be hosting, and I'd go out. I remember one day I walked out and I said, hello, the show's going to start in 10 minutes time. And I did 10 minutes. And then, you know, and everyone's roaring. And then I said, I'll be back in a minute, and very confidently walked out and died for 10 minutes then. I couldn't work out what happened. So at that point, you're just learning how to do it. Every heckle feels really personal as well, you know, because you get different types of rooms with different people, and you just don't know what you're doing because no one actually tells you. So you have to learn very much on the job. It's a very public apprenticeship.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah, I saw something recently where I saw how quick you'd responded, and I don't think the lady was particularly offensive, probably more of an attention seeker, but she you asked her name, and she said she was Caroline with an E, and you replied,
I knew there was some sort of drug involved or something like that, which was not bad. But the thing is, it was appropriate, and I know that does. Some people go, well, that's not very good or whatever. But I promise you, for that room at that time, with a woman in her 70s, I didn't comment on her being female. I didn't comment on her age or make her feel bad. Didn't have a go at her for her appearance. I was simply speaking about her conduct, and that was, in my opinion, probably one of the best things to come back with, because nobody was hurt by that. All the audience embraced it, and I think it's very, you know, it's a weird one. You do have to read the room. You know, sometimes I've got a gig soon where it's just going to be all blokes. Well, that's a different vibe. Not because I'm sexist, but simply because if you think about it, if somebody, you can get any bloke in a room full of with just his mates is going to respond differently to how he would if he was out with his wife. Therefore, and I don't make assumptions about people, I'm going to pitch it differently. If somebody hackles me and he's with his wife, I'm not going to come back in quite the same way. No, and also, it doesn't have to be confrontational either. You know, I'm not a rude person off stage, and this is the thing, because people say to me, "But you're really nice to all the hecklers," and I go, "Oh yeah, because I'm not rude off stage, so I'm not going to be rude on stage, because that wouldn't be authentic to me." But don't get me wrong, just come and see me first thing in the morning, Frank. I'm a nightmare, mate. I don't want to speak to anybody. I'm not Mother Teresa, but the fact is you have to learn all that as you go. And so I've learned to sort of almost be nurturing of an audience. And sometimes I'll say to a heckler, listen, that wasn't bad, but how about I'll leave you to think about it and I'll come back in a minute and I'll speak to the grown-ups and I'll be back there. And sometimes they'll heckle immediately. Sometimes they do get unpleasant, in which case there's always a way of dealing with it. There's always a way of reading the room. So I take a pride in being able to specialize in reading the room and playing the room in front of me.
You had an incident at one of your gigs with a chap in a wheelchair.
Oh, yes.
Are you happy to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do. If that's the one, it was at Kings Lynn Corn Exchange. And I was comparing, and I was told there's about 300 people. I mean, of course, the number of people changes every time I tell the story. So, there's 400 people in. And I was, and so I walk out in front of these 500 people. And the manager said to me, don't make jokes about wheelchairs. Well, that's not really my thing anyway. And don't make jokes about cancer. And well, I'm not going to do that either, because that isn't really what I do. However, I will speak to anybody, because why wouldn't I? They're there in the audience. If they can communicate, then I will. And this guy in a wheelchair is sat there with his family, and he heckles. And I thought, well, I'll ignore it. And then he heckled the second time, and it got a laugh. And then he heckled me a third time, and I thought, no, I'm sorry. I don't care if you've got cancer. I have to address this now. And I was told he had a month left to live. And the stage was about 2 feet off the ground. So I went over to him and I wheeled him to the front of the stage and sort of parked him in front of the stage. And I remember his daughter saying, be careful with him. And I said, so, well, he's only got a month left to live. I wasn't being insensitive. And I said into the microphone, well, you were hilarious over there, mate. What have you got to say for yourself? And I put the mic to his mouth and he said, I'm dying of cancer. I've only got a month left. And at that point, I thought, oh my God, what am I doing? This is going to go horrible. But I committed to it. And I said, well, I thought you were going to be a bit funnier than that, to be honest. And we went to and fro. And I worked out quite quickly that every time he spoke, he would get a massive laugh and that I wouldn't. So therefore, I let him be funny. And every time he got a laugh, I'd let him get the laugh. And I would go, you're going to laugh at that? Really? And then give him the mic again. And he would say something funny. But we got to the end of it and I wheeled him back. I said, listen, you might well have messed up the show now. And of course, I said, so let's hope the show's going to be great. And I wheeled him back over. And afterwards, his daughter hugged me and said, thank you. My dad, always fancied having a go at comedy. And it stayed with me. I felt really happy and proud, that I managed to do that. Everybody had a great gig. My friend Meryl O'Rourke, who's a very, very good comedian, told me recently, and that meant a lot to me. She said, oh, yeah, I used that story as an example of sort of finding your own comic voice. Yeah. She said, because on paper, that shouldn't be able to work. There's no way you should be able to get away with that.
You wouldn't have scripted it, would you? You wouldn't have written that down in a script, would you? Blimey.
Absolutely not. If somebody said to me, listen, can you wheel the guy with cancer out onto stage and take the piss out of him for 10 minutes? Essentially, I would go, nah, I'll get someone else to do that. Thanks very much. Yeah. But it was authentic and it felt like the right thing to do. And I made a hero of him, really. Yeah. And we had a laugh and I was humble enough, I suppose. And that's my whole point. When it comes to interacting with the crowd, you don't always have to be the alpha. Sometimes you zing back at somebody and you think, oh, that went well, didn't it? But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you're a bit more gentle. And sometimes you allow people just to be funny. I've walked out and high-fived someone before and said, mate, that was truly astonishing. Thank you. But bear in mind, you said you were an accountant. I'm the one who's supposed to be the comedian. So please just let me do my job. And they're fine with that. Other times I once walked out in the front row and I looked, I knew there was something up. And I spoke to this guy and he very discreetly said to me, look, I'm on a first date. He said, do you mind not talking to me? And I went, yeah, of course, no problem. And so I just spoke to somebody else. So it's very much about picking up on the energy and the vibe you're getting from the people in front of you. And that's all it is. That is all it is. And what I say is all it is. It goes wrong as well, obviously.
I'm going to touch on something else now. We haven't gone into personal relationships. But I know you have a partner, a long-term partner.
Yes, I do.
And throughout all this you know, the comedic side of your life, shall we say. An incident took place, a serious incident took place,
Yes.
which clearly would have, you know, challenged you and clearly her as well. Can you elaborate a bit on what that was and how that affected you during the course of your, you know, of your career?
Absolutely. Well, okay. So my missus is my favourite person in the world. I adore my missus. I'm blessed. She's 5'1". She's Glaswegian. Her name is Martha, and we've been together now for 16 years. Prior to that, I had a few relationships. I remember one woman, and this sounds like shtick, it's not. She said to me, "Look, you're a nice guy." She said, "But I want to go out with a bad boy." And I remember saying to her, I was only a young man, I was only 12. I said, "Well, what do you mean a bad boy?" She said, "I want someone who's a little bit dangerous." And I said to her, "I once electrocuted a lifeguard. That is the very definition of a little bit dangerous. Yeah. Could we not please be together?" And she said, "No, that is not what I meant." But me and Martha, I met her in 2005, and we were long distance for about 5 years. I was living in Cardiff, she was living in Glasgow, and you have to really love someone to get on a National Express bus for 12 hours. But I did.
You wouldn't want to walk around, would you?
No, absolutely not. No, and it was so far away. It's just such a long way. And I'd heard all about Glasgow. You know, she said to me, "Come and meet the family." And she said, I said, "Well, I've heard about Glasgow, but it's very intimidating. Any advice?" She said, "Don't be a dick." And I said, "Well, how will I know if I'll be one?" And she said, "You'll know." She said, "Because they'll tell you."
They'll tell you.
And I love them up there. I adore them. Well, anyway, she was working. 2006, she was working with young men who were taking cocaine and who were on steroids. So she's always done something in mental health. Now, unrelated to her workplace, there was a guy who lived above her who tripled in size. He was about 5'7". That is relevant. And he tripled in size because he was taking steroids and he was bodybuilding. And he was always very nice to her. And he always said to her, "Listen, if my music is too loud, just let me know. It's not a problem." So one night, I'm dying on my ass in Leicester. God, it was a horrible gig. And I get a phone call or a message at about 1:30 from Martha, just saying, in typical Glaswegian form, just saying, "Look, don't worry. I'm in hospital. There's been a bit of an incident." And I thought, "Well, what's that then?" You know, so she went upstairs and she knocked on the guy's door and said, "Look, do you mind turning your music down? It is 1:00 in the morning." And he said, "No, not at all. And I'm going to tell you how it happened. And I'm not saying that I hope nobody watches this is upset by it, but this is what happened. She turned away. He grabbed her by the back of the neck. He threw her to the floor. He kicked her in the head. The two other guys who were with him, they joined in, and she went downstairs. And the policeman who came later said he was actually crying at the time. And he said, "Listen, I'm really sorry." He said, "I could see the outline of the guy's fingers in the back of your neck where he'd been grabbing you that hard." He said, "I thought that he'd smashed your face in." He said, "And I could tell by listening on the phone, on the 999 call, that you were legitimate and that you were authentic." She lost her hearing in one ear. That is permanent. We don't know if it was because of the attack or if it was because of the brain tumor that was there a year later. We don't know if there's a correlation between the two. I don't think there was. I think it was just, maybe the kick to the head was just coincidental. She phoned the police. Half an hour later, there was a knock on the door. She opened the door, and there were 5 of them from upstairs. One of them punched her in the face. They were wearing a ring. So by the time the policeman arrived, everybody had gone, and the policeman and his colleague, the policeman was shouting at Martha because she'd gone deaf in one ear completely and felt like she was underwater with the other ear. So it was a horrible attack. It really was. There weren't any witnesses. It gets thrown out of court for various reasons. I don't know the technicalities of it. I do know that the following day she went back to work with young men who were taking steroids and snorting coke. And I said to her quite recently about that, why? And she said, "Well, because I care." She said, "And if you care about people, if it's in your soul to care about people, you don't choose when you care." She said, "And it wasn't them who attacked me." So she went back, and that's very humbling. So we fast forward a year. The guy is still dealing. He's upstairs, and he's got a theatrical streak to him. He was he beat up a young boy, a 14-year-old in the close, takes his top off. Look at me, I'm King Kong. Who wants it? And all this. Who's going to stop me? He's got a sports car out the front. So he's clearly dealing, and he is known by police, but they want to get his supplier, I imagine. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but bear in mind, at this point, I know nothing about crime. I've not been involved in crime. I don't know anything about it. And I'm quite, I like people. I think people are all right. You know, if you meet people halfway or more, they'll give you just as much back as what I've always believed in. I still believe it now, incidentally. This story does end well, I promise you. And her sister, Mags, had enough. She heard the guy boasting. So he's still living above Martha, still terrorizing the community, still dealing, still boasting, still taking steroids. And Mags overhears him saying at the local spa shop, yeah, I've been boxing with one of my neighbors. And she'd had enough at that point. And this young woman who, you know, works in mental health went to buy a gun. And bear in mind, we're not people who buy guns. No. So she went to see an old school guy who back in the day was a debt collector. Now, I know there's lots of people who are like that, but he was. And she said, have you heard what happened? And he said, yes. She said, I want to kill him. Can you buy me a gun, please? I've got 500 quid. And he, to his credit, said, no. And she said, I'll go somewhere else. And he said, no, you won't, because I'll put word out. You're not having one. And then he said to her, and I thought at the time before I met him that he was being really macho. He said to her, look, he said, have you ever considered what it's like to actually shoot somebody? It's not like on the telly, it'll be horrible. And you'll go to jail, assuming you actually get a gun. And he kind of talked her through it. And then he said to her, I don't want to tell you this. He said, but I stabbed somebody once. He said, and I thought at the time before I met him again, I thought, oh, is he being macho? No. He said, it's a very distinct sound. It's a very unpleasant feeling. He said, it's a look in a man's eyes that you never forget. He said, the best thing you can do is take that money, either buy something nice for your sister or put the money back in your building society. Now, I met him, and in 2008, I get a phone call when I was at the Edinburgh Festival doing a show. Meet me at Buchanan Street bus station. Now, at this point, I was still long distance with Martha. I was heartbroken because I've watched her shrinking into herself. I've seen it damage her self-esteem, and it's killing me. I mean, my God, because I don't know what to do, because I'm the guy who believes in the human spirit, and I believe in people, and I like people, and I want the best from people. Not because I'm a sycophant. I want to meet someone on a good day, on their best day, because they inspire me to be my best. But at this point, everything's against me. I can't sleep, and I'm, you know, eating all the time, and I'm hurting myself, and I've got all these voices in my head. I mean, not, you know, telling me you're not a real man. You're a coward, and that isn't true. That isn't true. And Martha said to me, "Don't do anything. Don't be violent." And I'm glad she said that, because I love her and I respect her. So I respected her wishes. But doing nothing would have killed me. Honestly, I would have died. It sounds so dramatic, but it would have just slowly killed me. Right? But so it's all consuming. So I get a phone call, and I had to say to my producer in 2008, I've got to go to Buchanan Street bus station to meet a guy who can help me. And he said, well, who is it? I said, I don't know. Where are you going? I said, I don't know. Well, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, but I have to go. So someone else stood in for me. And I went, and I get into a car, and the guy I was with, I was twice the size then, and the guy I was with was massive as well. And we go to a hotel in Glasgow, and we get in, and we go to a gym, and there's a man, he's in his mid-70s, 74 he was. Unbeknown to me, he was dying of cancer at the time, and he was pounding on the treadmill, almost like a 25-year-old. And something was said, and the people in the gym, I think they thought that me and the other guy might have been contracted to come and have a go at this guy. You know, they think it was some sort of hit. I don't know. I don't even, at this point, I knew nothing about crime. And the guy on the treadmill looked over this older guy, and he nodded at me. And I thought, well, it seems like we have some sort of rapport. So I kind of nodded back. I thought, why not? You know, mirror his body language. And then the guy I was with comes over, and he goes, right, go upstairs. He's going to be up in half an hour. Longest half hour of my life. Turns out it was about an hour and a half, because the guy was, you know, we'd interrupted his workout. And he comes over. I'm sat in the middle of a hotel. Now, the reason I was sat there in the foyer was I was told, he told me this, there were cameras all around. And he was just safeguarding because there were two rival drug gangs who were there as well. And he just said to me, look, if anything happened, it was not going to happen. He said, if it did, you're on camera. He said, I just wanted you to be safe. But he told me that. But the initial thing, he walks over, he's wearing a suit, quite serious looking guy. And he says, hello, nice to meet you. What do you want? He said, I mean, you know, it is nice to meet you, but what do you want? And I said, I don't know. And he said, okay, well, listen, I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Would you like to join me? And I said, okay. He said, let's find out what you want. And I told him about Martha. And I said to him, you know, what do I call you? And I'll call him Alan for the sake of this, just out of respect for him and his family. And he told me his name. And I said, well, like, are you a gangster? You know, and he kind of went, no, not really. And he told me, he said, look, I'm a thief by trade. He said, and I sit here, I'm retired now. And he told me 30 years ago, I would probably have robbed you. He said, but that's not what I do now. He said, can I ask you a question? And I said, of course. He said, are you fear? I mean, are you afraid? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, that's okay. He said, because people use the word fear and respect to mean the same thing. He said, I don't know who you are. You don't know me. He said, but let's have a cup of coffee and let's respect each other in the purest sense of the word. And he told me all about his life. And then he said to me, have a look at the guy over there. And he pointed to this young guy in his 20s. He said, his face has been slashed. He said, someone did that a couple of weeks ago. His dad shot the guy. Didn't kill him, shot him, which I'm told is actually quite difficult to do, but he did. And he said, that's how you get revenge. He said, now I can see, so I don't presume to know anything about you. He said, but I can see just by your body language, by your demeanor and the hurt in your eyes, the sort of pain and the hurt that you want to inflict upon the man who attacked Martha. That's the kind of hurt that's going to change you for the rest of your life. He said, and it's going to change him too. And there's consequences. You need to ask yourself, do you want to make that kind of change? He said, nobody in the world would blame you if you kicked the guy's door down and you beat him to death. He said, I know what I would do, but I'm not you. And then he said to me, I need to ask you one question. And I said, what's that? And he said, do you love Martha more than you hate the guy who attacked her? And I just started crying. And he said to me, listen, it's all right. He said, you're allowed to cry. He says, okay, there's nothing wrong with that, nothing to be ashamed of. He said, but you've probably answered your own question. And then he said to me, would you like to come around Glasgow? I'll show you. And he was telling me all about crime and how it worked. And what I loved about it was he wasn't doing it in the sort of swaggering macho way. He was doing it in a way that was insightful. And he told me about why he became a thief. And he talked about the psychology of it and how to read people. And he also said to me, I went to jail. He said, because none of us are criminal masterminds. He said, there's no such thing. He said, everybody gets caught in the end. He said, if you don't get caught, no one knows about you. He said, so therefore, statistically, everyone does. He said, it's not a great life. He said, I've never heard of the guy who attacked Martha. So he's a small-time drug dealer. And he said, do you know the best that can happen? He's going to reach the top of the tree. And then where does he go? He said, I'll tell you where he goes. He'll have a multi-million-pound mansion. That sounds good to you. He said, it won't be because there's security cameras everywhere. And his right-hand man, he's worried about whether he's going to stab him in the back. He said, and there's a cruel irony. He said, quite often, somebody who's a drug dealer like that, their children end up addicted to drugs and they die. He said, you can read about it. He said, so you're not missing out on not being a criminal. Trust me. He said, the best thing you can do is just be who you are. And he drove me around for about 8 hours. I went to his house. I ate cookies at his house. He said, oh, my grandson doesn't. And I went to his funeral 2 years later. It was beautiful. There were 400 people there. He was probably a much bigger face than I could possibly have imagined at the time. And I thought I was a coward. And somebody recently said to me, I did 10 years in jail. And you, a straight goer, got into a car in 2008 with a Glaswegian criminal. He said, and you went everywhere with him, all over Glasgow, and you went to his house. He said, please, there's nothing cowardice about you, mate. There's no way in the world that that's cowardice. He said, if anything.
Yes, fair comment. That is a fair comment.
But that helped me. That helped me. But what I was struck, Frank, is I was struck by his wisdom.
Yeah.
And that was what appealed to me. I thought, my God, I didn't even know what a criminal was. I'd never met one before. I didn't have a chance to even think about it. But I didn't see the crimes. I didn't see the glamour. I just saw a man who was reflecting on his life. And I thought, wow, you're really, really interesting. What an interesting man. And he helped me. And I'm eternally grateful.
So through that period, were you still endeavouring to be a comedian? Were you still trying to perform?
Well, the sad part of it, and I promise you there's a happy ending to all this, which I will tell you about, but I was still performing. But Martha was a very, very good comic. I mean, she had 5-star reviews in 2005, saying that she was, it was unbelievable. I promise you, she was incredible. But she would interact with the crowd. Yeah. And when she lost her hearing, she couldn't hear where the hackles were coming from. She's since got 5-star reviews for telling stories. And they're brilliant. So she's rebuilt. So we've rebuilt our lives. We have. But I used to, I'm just being honest with you. I would spend several years thinking to myself, I shouldn't be doing this. It should be Martha who's performing, not me. I should have been the one who got attacked, But the reality is, it's not just, I know this to be the case. I haven't spoken to a lot of people now anyway, but men like that probably wouldn't have attacked me. They'll attack a woman. I'd be very surprised if they would have attacked me. I think it would have been a very different vibe. But, I punished myself and I didn't want to be on stage. I didn't think I deserved it. And, I'd be bawling my eyes out on all the way to a gig, do the gig, come home, cry my eyes out again. And then of course, we moved to London about 10 years ago, 2009. And there was almost a change in how I performed, because I was very emotional and very self-conscious and not really wanting to be there, but I was getting paid work. And Martha said to me one day, listen, you're a really nice guy. Why don't you be a nice guy to the audience? And I went, all right. And so I did. And I did a gig at South Wimbledon, a pub called The Grove, which is why we moved to South London, actually. We came to South London and there were two archetypal, and they do exist, South London geezers. And they were talking, and we just went in for a drink because we were looking around the area. And I get Martha a gin and tonic or whatever, got my pint. And one of them says to us, anyway, this fucking geezer. And then he turns to my missus and he says, I do apologise, my darling, please pardon my French. And she said, oh, thank you. She said to me, I don't think that's French. And we just laughed about it. And then he turns back and he goes, anyway, this fucking geezer. And we both laughed. And she said to me, do you know what? That could have happened in Glasgow. She said the accent is different, but the sensibility is similar. She said, I love it. Let's move here. And so that was the pub, weirdly, where they had a gig where I changed how I performed. And all because Martha said to me, look, you got to learn to love the audience and stop being self-conscious and stop apologizing and try and let go. So all that was part of the healing process. It took a lot of years to get over it.
So currently then, Matt, you're clearly still performing. I appreciate that COVID's, has made a dent. Yes. And currently we don't know from 1 week. We don't know from 1 week to the next. No. It's very difficult to make plans. But presumably you're gonna continue with your routines and so on. Yeah.
Very much so. Yeah, I'm going to carry on no matter what. COVID has been hard, obviously. Martha still works in mental health. Christmas Day, she saved somebody's life on Christmas Day. She stopped them from killing killing themselves. And I'll be honest with you, I'm in awe of her. But it's very hard for me to get upset that my joke about curly whirlies doesn't work when she's just saved somebody's life. It's kind of, you think, I have very little to complain about. So no, I'm absolutely going for it, and I'm enjoying it very much. What I would say is that, see, what happened to her has had a massive, massive impact on us. But we are together, and we're very, very happy, very happy. And and people have lots of tragedies in life, and lots of really sad things happen, and I would never dilute that or dismiss that in any capacity. People react to things in different ways, but for me personally, as big a tragedy would be if I didn't get over it. If I was still walking around thinking I'm not a proper man and I should have taken revenge, you know, suddenly I just woke up a few years ago and I realized actually this doesn't own me anymore. It happened and it'll always be there in the same way that, I don't know, I've got a dodgy thumb. You know, someone punched me on the thumb one day when I was sparring very badly at the gym. And every now and again, even 20 years later, I get a little pain in my thumb. Well, I kind of get that mentally, a little twinge of regret sometimes, but that's okay. And I think that there's lots of tragedies in life. I'm saying this hopefully to inspire people because yes, acknowledge that something is really bad, but then take a pride in being able to distance yourself from it and to deal with it and to function. Because if I walked around for the rest of my life angry and hurting, that would be such a shame. It would be just a waste. It really would.
Well, Matt, I'm going to finish up now, but what I would ask you to do, if you don't mind, if you could just stay around for 5 minutes more afterwards.
Of course. Yes, of course.
And, you know, I say the same thing every time we do a podcast, that to say the criteria for coming on is real and inspiring people, and you've certainly been very real today. And I'd like to think you've inspired people as well, because the things that you said that you thought you wasn't capable of, it didn't stop you. You still had a go. You still went for it. And it's nice to know that when you put your mind to doing the comedy, you know, you'd made up your mind you was going to be a comedian, that you've achieved that. And as I say, I hope that inspires other people to, to go for the things that they desire as well. So what I'm going to do now, again, I'm just going to thank Category A Consultancy for their sponsorship today. Clearly going to thank Gary Mac the Hat for his assistance. Again, I'd like to mention the Alzheimer's Society and the Change Your Life, Put Down Your Knife group. They're doing some fantastic work at the moment, and hopefully we can support them even more in the future. Again, I'd like to thank all our subscribers and all those who follow the podcast. As I say, clearly we would like some more people to subscribe. It doesn't cost anything, but it does help us attract other real and inspiring people. And I'd just like to make one other point. It seems to have become the fashion in the podcast world at the moment to what they call the podcast wars. Now, and I've had the pleasure of being on Sean Atwood's podcast and also James English. I think they do a lot of good work, but there's a lot of pretenders out there, and I think they need to have a good look at themselves, because I don't think they're doing the podcast world any good whatsoever. They could be doing a lot more to help people. And I'd like to think, through Frankly Speaking, we're giving people the opportunity to come on and tell their stories, gain some inspiration themselves, and clearly, inspire others as well. So thanks for being part of that, mate. Matt, I really do appreciate that.
No, thanks, Frank. Thank you.
Hope your career, carries on the way it's going. Keep people up. We all need a laugh, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and anybody watching who thinks, hang on, he's a bit earnest. Well, I am, but I'm good at comedy. I am, genuinely. I wouldn't say it.
Well,
There'd be no point. I am.
I've witnessed it, so I'll certainly endorse that, Matt. Anyway, once again, thanks for coming on. Really enjoyed meeting you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And all the very best for the future. Cheers, Matt. Thanks very much. Thank you.
See you, Frank.
Right.